Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see your smiling faces. We're few in number. Glad to have you with us. I read this story a while back about this apparently park ranger was wandering through the forest after a fire, and he found this burnt bird sitting on the ground. And she was all burnt up. And she was blackened up and she was dead. And the ranger went over and, he was kind of sickened to see that, as you could all imagine that. And he kicked over the what was left there, and out from under the mother ran a bunch of little chicks, still alive. She could have flown to safety. The mother would have had enough snap to be able to flown to safety, but she didn't. She stayed there with her babies all the way to the end. She sacrificed her life for theirs. And I heard this story a long time ago as well. And when you do some research on that story, you find that some people say that, oh, you know what, that never really happened. If you go to Snopes, that's what it'll tell you. And of course, I think they don't get the point when they read that. The point of that is it's a story to help people understand the dedication of a mother to her children. But also, Jesus Christ used that very same example when he was here on the earth. So whether it's truth or fiction, it doesn't matter. The point is that it makes a point, and makes a good point, and it's a point we're going to deal with today. God promises us many things in our lives. I don't know if we've ever taken the time to sit down and go through the promises of God, but if you ever do that, you will find that it's very enlightening to see all the things that God says he will do for us. And it's important for us to understand those things. But among those promises is the promises of protection in our life. Did you know that God promises us to protect us? I think maybe it's a promise that we don't dwell on very often. So God promises a lot of things, and one of them is protection. And it's a promise, as I said, I don't think we dwell on very much. Because we get protections oftentimes that we don't even recognize that we're getting. We go wander around in the world out there, and we see people sick with COVID and all kinds of things, and we don't come down with it for some reason. Or we do. But sometimes we don't. Susie and I were blessed that we didn't get it during that whole time. So we got protected from it. I'm not saying that we did anything great. We didn't do anything out of the normal for us. But somehow or another, we were protected from it. So perhaps by not considering or thinking about the promises of protection God gives to us, we don't see God's hand in our life as well as we should see it. And that's what we're going to review today. God's promise of protection in our lives. And it's a very important promise, as you'll see as we go through the scriptures. So when we consider our state or our condition as such that perhaps God has looked away, and we're thinking about so much that's coming on us, and you wonder, well, man, maybe God's not paying any attention to me. Well, if we get to that point, we should consider Jesus' example that even a bird can't fall out of the sky that God doesn't know about. If that's the case, our problems are made well aware to God. He watches every little thing about us. He even knows if a hair falls out of our head. God notices. And if he's paying attention to the birds that fly, and when one dies, he knows it, how much more valuable are we than the birds to God? Remember, he's in the process of creating a family. He's making children, heirs of the promise. That's what it says in the scripture. If that's the case, how much more valuable are we to God? He gives us an example of a loving father who sacrifices his life to provide for his wife and children. We look around our families and we see our own fathers. And I look back at my dad. And my dad and I did not get along. We didn't. And I didn't really appreciate what he had to go through to provide what he did. He was an uneducated man, my dad. He never got past 6th grade. And yet, somehow or another, he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and was able to provide for a living for my mom and all of us kids. And we didn't lack for anything. We didn't have anything extra, but we didn't lack for anything. We always had a meal. and we always had family time. We were always able to go over and visit with the grandparents. And sometimes I think I don't appreciate that as much as I should. And God gives us those types of examples for us to look on and say, you know what, if our Father is that good to us, how much better is God? How much more of a protection does God provide for us in our lives? Well, let's start with Matthew 23, and we'll start there. Jesus alluded to that example of the mother bird or the mother chick covering her little hens. And that's what we're going to read at this point. Just the one verse, Matthew 23:37. Jesus is standing on the hill overlooking Jerusalem. And this is what he says. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that kill the prophets and stone them which are sent to you, how often would I have gathered your children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, and you wouldn't have it." That's what Jesus said. Now, anyone who doubts that Jesus was alive before he came as a man can read that verse and say, what's he talking about? He had to have been alive, because to know that he sent the prophets and those who were taught to teach them and knew what they did to them. And that's what he said. Even as a hen gathered her chickens under her wings, you wouldn't have it. I would have done that for you. That's what he's saying. I would have protected you and provided that you wouldn't have it. Psalm 91 now. This is something that David wrote about the protection of God. And beginning in verse 2. "I will say of the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him I will trust. Surely he will deliver you from the fowler's trap." Now, what's a fowler? Anybody know what a fowler is?
Snare.
No.
It's bird.
It's one who catches birds. Exactly right. He will deliver you from the fowler's trap. See the same scenario? Talking about birds. God uses birds quite a bit, actually, to make us understand things. It says, and from the destroying plague, he shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall trust. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. See, we can trust God. That's what he's getting at there. We can trust him. He will shelter us under his wings, just like Jesus mentioned on the hill overlooking Jerusalem. He will. He's trustworthy. He will provide and protect you in every way. He says, you'll not fear the terrors by night. You won't be afraid about what's under your bed. Or what's hiding in the closet. You won't be afraid of all that. You won't be afraid of the arrow that flies by day, or the plague that walks in darkness, or the destruction laying waste at noonday. None of that's going to make you afraid, he says. 1,000 will fall at your side and 10,000 at your right side, and it won't come near you. Talking about plagues, right? Well, what if we die from something? Well, we're going to die. That was the curse that was put on us from the garden, wasn't it? So that's going to happen. God's not saying he's going to keep us from dying. But what he is saying is that he will bring you back. He'll give you something better that you've got than what you've got right now. Well, David did have protection from God. If you want to turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 13, and beginning in verse 32, he had protection from God virtually his whole life, because God had a plan for him. God was going to use him in a very powerful way. And God made sure that the things he got himself into didn't kill him. So what did he get himself into? Well, there's a big, long list of stuff that David got into that could have gotten him killed. So let's read about it. So remember this situation, 1 Samuel 17:32. This is in the middle of the business with Goliath. And he's standing out there cursing the God of Israel and telling him that there is no God, or he's too feeble, he's a weak God, and he's here and he can take them all on. But in verse 32, David says to Saul, "Let no man's heart become feeble because of him," meaning Goliath. "I, your servant, will go out and have a fight with this Philistine." And Saul says to David, You're not able to go out against this Philistine and have a fight with him. You're only a boy. And he's been a man of war from his earliest days. And David said to Saul, your servant has been the keeper of his father's sheep. I've been a keeper of my father's sheep. That's what he's telling him. And if a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and overcame him and took it out of his mouth. And if it turned on me and came at me, I took him by the hair and overcame him and put him to death. A bear or a lion. Was David exaggerating? No, he was protecting. That's what he was. God was protecting him. He goes on to say, your servant has overcome lion and bear. And the fate of this Philistine, who is without circumcision, will be like theirs. He's saying, I'm not afraid of him. Why was he not afraid of this giant who killed many people? Because he had someone who was bigger than the giant on his side, right? Someone who would protect him and had been protecting him his whole life. It says, the fate of this Philistine will be like theirs, seeing that he has put shame on the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord, who kept me safe from the grip of the lion and the bear, will be my savior from the hands of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, okay, go ahead. May the Lord be with you. You can almost hear the sarcasm in his voice, right? He didn't think David had a chance. Yeah, go ahead. God be with you. But what happened? We all know what happened. David picked up the 3 small stones and slung them, and was it 3 or 5? 5. Picked up the stones and slung one and put Goliath down. That Deuteronomy 32 now. In Deuteronomy, we can read that, and do read, that God is telling us that he is able to protect an entire nation. It's not too big for him. His arm's not short. He is able to protect it and provide for an entire nation. Deuteronomy 32:9, for the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. Now, that's a very short sentence, or set of sentences. And it's very powerful if you think about it. God's portion is his people. That's what he's here for. His portion is his people. That's us in this room and all around the world who keep in his Sabbath today. God's portion is his people. And Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land and in the deserted, howling wilderness. He led him about. He cared for him. He kept him as the pupil of his eye. As an eagle stirs up her nest. There's your bird again. As an eagle stirs up her nest, flutters over her young, spreads abroad her wings, takes them and bears them on her wing. There's the example of the bird again. And that's what God is doing. He wants us to come up under his wings. He wants to protect us, to provide for us in every way. And it's important to God. He says we are his inheritance. We are his portion. That's how important it is to him. He is looking for his portion. Just like I'm looking for a portion of my inheritance. It's going to come to me here shortly because Mom died a couple years ago. But that's nothing compared to the inheritance that God is looking for. He's creating that inheritance himself. And he's creating it in us. So it should be no surprise to us that God is protecting his inheritance. He's watching out for it. We'll turn over to Ruth 2 in verse 8. We're going to see that God, in fact, protected Ruth as well. And as we go through this, I'm going to list off a number of people that we can see that God actually provided some protection for. He was watching over and made sure certain things happened for them. But in Ruth 2, we'll start in verse 8, but the really important verse I want to get to is in verse 12. So Boaz says to Ruth in verse 8, are you listening to me, my daughter? Do you hear me? Don't go in the other fields. Don't go away from here. Stay close by my maidens. And remember, she was going about the different fields and gleaning, although Naomi had told her, well, just go to Boaz's field. So I guess he was concerned that she would wander off to the other fields to glean. He's telling her, listen to me. Don't go to those other fields. Stay right here. He's watching over her too. You know, sometimes when God protects us, he sends somebody for that protection in our life. He will send someone out to protect us, put us in a place where we can be protected. He goes on to tell her in verse 9, let your eyes be on the field that they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men that they shall not touch you? There's your protection, right? You know, sometimes we live in a country that's fairly free. We don't realize the real evil that's out there in the world. You know, women can't walk down the street at night in some cities around the world. They can't even walk down the street during the day in some places without fear of being attacked. But God protects our ladies. Verse 10, Ruth says, well, it says, then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said to him, why have I found grace in your eyes that you take notice of me since I am a foreigner? Do we ever ask God that question? What, Father, what am I that you take notice of me? Even David even asked that question. What am I that you take notice of me? You have everything in the universe at your disposal, and yet you take notice of me. Well, the answer to that is we're his children. He's keeping an eye on us. Boaz answered her in verse 11, says to her, it's been fully shown to me that all you have done to your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and have come to a people who you did not know before now. So Boaz was protecting her because he saw what she had done, that she was a woman of virtue. Then he goes on to say, may the Lord repay your work, and may a full reward be given to you from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to trust. So he knew she had come to trust in the God of Israel. And she was showing it by the way that she was doing her mother-in-law, treating her mother-in-law, and responding to her mother-in-law. And that was important for Boaz to understand. But we recognize that God was using Boaz to protect her from the rottenness in the world around. You know, just because they were other people of Israel doesn't mean that they were saints. Doesn't mean that they were not going to do her harm or do something else to her. You know, even Judah, y'all remember Judah? He had a daughter-in-law named Tamar. And her husband died without giving her a son. Remember that story? Well, God was watching over her, and yet Judah took advantage of her time and time again and was ready to have her stoned for adultery. And the man she'd done adultery with was Judah. And she had a child. She was given a child because of that. And she was found to be righteous because she had done right and Judah had done wrong. God was protecting her as well. How about Sarah? Genesis 12 and beginning in verse 10. Sarah got some protection. You know, God liked to play with Sarah a little bit. You know, he came to the camp one day and said, when I come back this time next year, she's going to have a baby. And what'd she do? She laughed. She laughed out loud. And then he asked her about, why'd your wife laugh? Asked Abraham. I didn't laugh. Yeah, you laughed. God was poking at her a little bit. You know, God's got a sense of humor. But he was watching over her too in this situation. In verse 10 of Genesis 12, it says, when the famine struck the land, Abram went down to Egypt to live as an immigrant, since the famine was so severe in the land. Just before he arrived in Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, I know you're a good-looking woman. When the Egyptians see you, they're going to say, this is his wife. And they'll kill me, but let you live. So tell them you're my sister. And they will treat me well for your sake, and I'll survive because of you. They're going to treat me good because of you, because you're my sister. Now this is the father of the faithful, remember? Hebrews 11. This is the fathers of the faithful. He didn't have much faith there, did he? He had to learn faith. He had to learn to trust in God. Just as we do, actually. When we talk about God's protection, we have to learn to trust in God. It just doesn't happen. Because, we can't see God. But we have to see the things that God does to develop our faith. In this case, we're going to see that Abraham got to see what God can do. Verse 14, when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how beautiful his wife was. When the Pharaoh's princes saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's household. Well, we know what's going to happen next, right? She's going to be a wife or a concubine. Things went well for Abram because of her. Well, his prophecy was fulfilled, wasn't it? He said they'll take care of him because of her. He acquired flocks and cattle and male donkeys and men servants and women servants and female donkeys and camels. Then the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues because of Abram's wife Sarah. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and said, "What's this you've done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister, so that I made her my wife? Now here's your wife, take her and go." Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning Abram, and they expelled him with his wife and everything he had. So they threw him out of the country because of what he did. But he was well treated because of her. The main thing that we can get from that, though, is that God was watching over Sarah and protecting her from what could have happened to her in Pharaoh's house. Something very similar happened with Isaac and Rebekah, right? You remember your scriptures. She also was protected by God. God does not just say he will protect us. He's given us powerful examples for us to be encouraged by so we can understand that his protection is real. He does this so we can be encouraged against those evils that Satan and his minions will throw against us. Amen. We will have evil thrown against us in our life because people are evil. People are evil that are out there. They're a mixture of good and evil, but they have no clue about God. If they had a clue about God, we'd have a full room right here. Mm-hmm. And we'd have a full room in buildings all over town because people would care about what God has to say. Even Joseph, he was protected from his brothers, wasn't he? His brothers were thinking they were going to kill him. They threw him down a well, and he said, "No, we're going to sell him into slavery." They thought they were going to get rid of him. Yet he ended up being God's agent in the protecting of the children of Israel, his brothers, and his father. He was the agent for that protection. And not just for them, but for all of Israel, all of Egypt as well. God protected the children of Israel in the desert. He put the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke to protect them from the Egyptians who were chasing them down. He even fed them for 40 years in the desert. Gave them food. Their shoes didn't even wear out. God cared and protected the children of Israel. So even a whole nation was not too much for God to protect. So our little lives are easy for God to protect. He's there, and all he has to do is speak the words, and his words don't come back without being fulfilled. Even Paul, the Apostle Paul, he was protected against the stormy sea, wasn't he? Which not only protected him, but those who were on the boat with him. So that even though they had a shipwreck, they did not drown, and they ended up being protected. Daniel, we know that Daniel was protected. Remember, he was conspired against, and eventually he was thrown into a lion's den because, why? He would not comply with the conspiracy against him. He was protected from the hungry beast. And we know that those who had conspired against him were thrown in there, and those beasts were hungry, and they devoured those guys. But they wouldn't touch Daniel. Why? Because God was protecting him. He had the protection of God all around him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to obey God. And for that, they were thrown into a furnace, heated 7 times hotter. Yet God was there for them, wasn't he? So what did the king say? I see them in the furnace. They're not being burned up. God was protecting them. He was watching them the whole time. How about Esther? Now we're going to have We're not going to heaven, but the Jews celebrate Purim starting tonight, right? Right, Tommy? Or it starts at sunset tonight.
Last night.
Oh, last night too. Yeah, I should have known. They can't miss that one. She could have been killed though. Esther could have been killed for going into the king. And she sweated over that. She didn't want to go in there, but her uncle convinced her and said, "Well, you're not going to escape the death." And so she finally came to the point where she said, "You know what? I'm going to go. If I die, I die." Do we ever come to that point? You know, God's going to protect me. If He doesn't, I'll just die. That's fine. Whatever. I know God's not going to forget about me. Do we come to that point in our life? Not where we don't worry about it anymore? That's what the point is. She quit worrying about it and just gave it to God and says, "Okay, I'm going to go in." God gave her favor in the eyes of King Ahasuerus, though, didn't He? So she ended up being protected as she went into the king. So when we look at everything that the great characters of the Bible could have done, could have had done to them, we see how God stepped in and protected them. He protected them from that evil and any other thing that could have been done to them. And that's what God will do to us. He will protect us if we just accept it. Open our minds to it. Open our lives to it and accept that God is there. He's not going to walk away from us. He is watching over His children. Psalm 36 and verse 7 now. Psalm 36 and verse 7. And this is David writing, and this is what he has to say. "How precious is your loving kindness, O God, and the sons of men take refuge under the shadow of your wing. Amazing. God loves to use birds, doesn't He? And David incorporated into what he had to say. We love to take refuge under the shadow of God's wing, because there we know we are truly protected. It says, "They shall be satisfied with the fatness of your house, and you shall make them drink of the river of your pleasures. For with you," meaning God, "is the fountain of life. And in your light we shall see light. In God's light we will see light." With God is the fountain of life. He is the one who protects. In Psalm 32 verse 7, David writes this. "You are my hiding place." Do we look at God as a place to hide?
Yes.
We should. When things come up against us in the world, it seems like it's going to beat us down to the ground, and the rottenness in the world and the people around us. We can look to God and say, "You're my hiding place. You've got to do it, Father, because we can't do it. We can't stop these evils that go on in the world around us. We can't do it. But God can." He goes on to write, "You shall preserve me from trouble. You shall circle me with songs of deliverance." Selah. "I'll instruct you and teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you. My eye shall be on you. Do not be like the horse or like the mule, who have no understanding, whose mouth must be held in with bit and bridle, so they do not come near you. The wicked has many sorrows, but mercy embraces him who trusts in the Lord." There it is. Trust in the Lord. You want to trust in the Lord for protection? Yes, you do. Because, quite frankly, we really can't do a whole lot as individuals. "Be glad in the Lord. Rejoice, you righteous. Shout for joy, all you upright in heart." Shout for joy. You get that? What is that talking about? Shout for joy. Have you ever watched a little kitten play? Or a little puppy? They just run around and jump on things and play with one another and wrestle like they don't have a care in the world, and they don't. Because you're there to watch over them, aren't you? To keep them protected and safe. They just have no cares. That's how we need to be when we think about God. That free from worry and that happiness that comes with knowing that God is there. He protects us and nothing can hurt us. Proverbs 15, verse 3.
Thank you.
Proverbs 15 and verse 3.
God bless you, honey. Cold.
Just the one verse here. And Solomon writes this for us. He says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place. Where can we go to hide from God? Well, what did David say? He said, if I go to the highest mountain, you're there. If I go to the depths, you're there. Everywhere you go, there you are. Everywhere I go. And Solomon says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place. God, you can't get any place where God's not watching you. And he's offering protection. He wants you under his wings. That's where he wants you to stay. He wants all of us there so he can protect us and watch out for us. Exodus 19 and verse 3. God's speaking to Moses here in this verse. And he gives him an instruction. Yes, he gave him lots of instructions. But this particular instruction is relevant to what we're talking about today. He says this, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain and said, you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. What did he do to the Egyptians? He stopped them from killing Israel. He protected them. The whole point of what we're talking about today. He's telling Moses, go down there and tell them, you saw it. You were there. You saw what I did to the Egyptians. I bore you on eagle's wings. There was no eagle involved. But God's using that analogy of a bird again. I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me, to myself. Now, if you'll obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure to me above all the nations, for all the earth is mine. Everything is God's. Everything. And if everything is God's, and he can do anything by speaking the words,
Amen.
he has all the ability to protect you that you will ever need. It's just that simple. So he's telling Moses to go down and remind him, look, I am the one who has been protecting you this whole time. As if they need to be reminded of that, which fact they probably did, actually. Okay. Malachi 4 and verse 2, just one verse here. God promises us the protection of healing. You think about healing being a protection?
Yeah.
It is a protection. It protects your health, doesn't it? You know, all of us in here have some sort of a malady or ailment. Well, Paul had it even. And what did he tell Paul? My grace is sufficient for you. You can live with it. That's what he was telling Paul. We can live with some of the things that we have that are, like Tommy's has allergies, and in fact, frankly, I have allergies as well. And God hasn't healed my allergies. But he has healed me from some pretty tough stuff in the past. And he will do the same for all of us. In Malachi 4:2, it's written, but to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise, and healing will be in his wings. There's that analogy again. Healing is in his wings. Get up under God's wings and be healed. That's what he's telling us there. You shall go out and frisk like calves of the stall. Have you ever seen a calf play out in the field? Little calf of less than a year old. Oh, they just run and jump up in the air. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. They're the funniest thing to watch. That's what God's telling us to do. Look, enjoy. Have a good time. Get out there. Remember, though, I'm your protector. I'm watching over you. Stay close to me, but have fun. Enjoy life. That's what God's telling us. Don't let these people get us down. This world get us down. Enjoy. Be happy. Revelation 12 and verse 13. Our protection is not just for the now and for the past. God even promises future protection. Some people call this the part where Israel's going to go to the place of protection. I quite frankly, I don't know that we're going to go anywhere. I think God is perfectly capable, like he did with Israel, protecting us right where we are. But Revelation 12:13 says that when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who bore the man-child. And 2 wings of a great eagle were given to the woman, so that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the serpent's face. The important point there is God will give us what we need to be protected. This is what he's doing with this woman that bore the man-child. And we all know that to be Israel, and Israel's come out, church has come out of Israel. The point is that he will give her, he says, the 2 wings of a great eagle, he will give us what we need to be protected. Whatever it is, he will do that for us. We have to stay close to him, but he will give us what we need. Psalm 121 verse 7 now. This is David talking again. And he writes in Psalm 121 verse 7, the Lord shall keep you from all evil. The Lord shall keep you from all evil. He'll keep your soul, it says. He'll keep your life. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. God is watching. He is going to guard us, keep us from all the evil. Is evil coming upon us? You can bet it's going to try. But no, God's going to watch over us and keep us safe from the evil. Does this mean we won't be killed? No. There are martyrs. But what it means is if that happens, God will still raise us up in that day. And quite frankly, I long for that day. Psalm 27 and verse 9 now. Again, David speaking. He writes this. Don't let your face be covered from me. Don't put away your servant in wrath. David's talking to God. Says, please don't hide your face from me. Don't put me away. Don't be mad at me. You ever had your little kids come to you and say that? Oh, Mommy, Daddy, please don't be mad at me. Yeah, I've had that happen. Don't be mad at me. That's what God is saying here. Or David is saying here. God, please don't be mad at me. Don't hide from me. Don't quit loving me. He says, you've been my help. Don't give me up. See him pleading with God there? Don't take your support from me, God. You're the God of my salvation. Don't take it away. He looked to God for protection. He knew God was his protection. And he made some mistakes. We all know that. I don't think any of us has made as strong a mistake as he made. But a mistake is a mistake. And sometimes we have to look at our life and go, man, I made some bonehead decisions. And yet, God is still there waiting to protect us. If we just stay close to him. And that's what an analogy of the chicken is, and the chicken and her hen, the hen and her little chicks. That's what that analogy is all about, staying close to God, where he can protect us. Hebrews 13 now, and beginning in verse 5. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. Just a couple of verses here. And here's what's written. Be free from the love of money. We all need money, right? What does Solomon write? Money answers all things. We need money. God knows what we need. And he's writing here, be free from the love of money, and pleased with the things which you have. For he himself has said, I will be with you at all times. That's what Rick was referring to earlier. I will be with you at all times. To know that God is always with us, no matter what comes at us. God knows about it. And if we stay close to him, he's with us. He will do the protection he's promised us. Verse 6, so we say with a good heart, the Lord is my helper. I will have no fear. What is man able to do to me? What can he do to me? Well, man can kill me. No, he can't. All he can do is kill the body.
Right.
He cannot kill you.
That's all.
We have a God who has promised us that you may lay down, and you will lay down to sleep probably before I return. Have no fear. I will raise you back up again, and I'll give you a new body, a body that will never get old, a body that will never suffer as we suffer in these bodies. A body that needs to have no fear of anything. So we should have no fear of anything today because God's with us. Man can't do anything to us. So we've seen that God promises to watch over us and protect us. It's His promise. And if He says it, it's a deal. I mean, it's going to happen. But we have a part in it, don't we? What do we have to do? We got to look at that analogy that Jesus gave us that we see throughout the Scripture of the hen with her chicks. We got to get up under God's wings and stay there. How do we do that? Well, we have some tools for that. Studying His Word, pray, fasting, meditating on God's Word. Those are our tools to stay close to Him. No matter what happens, we stay on those tools, which means we're staying close to God, and He will protect us. He will provide for us in every way. And we've seen also how wonderfully God backed up His promise of protection to His people in the Bible. You know, particularly we saw, Esther, wow. You know, she was going to die, and she knew she was going to die. She just knew it. She didn't die. God was watching over her, and He used her powerfully to protect the nation of Israel. So instead of them being killed in one day, somebody else got killed in one day, right? Haman got killed in one day because Esther relied on the protection of God and stepped forward. Those promises extend to God's people even today. God's doesn't change simply because it's 1,000 years down the road or 2,000 years. He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. We can also call on God for His protection, and we should. And we need to stay close to God so that we can receive that protection. We can even do like David did and remind God of His promises to us. God, you promised me. We do it respectfully, of course, but we can remind God that He promised us, that He will protect us and watch out for us. Sometimes, as I said, His response will be, my grace is sufficient, but when in a real danger, that's not going to be His response. Yeah, we might not get healed of our allergies or a muscle sprain or a hernia, not as my case is. But you know what? When the real terrible things, the dangerous things come, I have no fear because God is there. He knows. And all of us should have that same exact thing. We all need to not fear because God is there. Sometimes God protects us by giving us favor in the eyes of others. We saw that in the Scripture. God will give us favor. Sometimes He moves things out of the way, gets them out of the way, takes the evil and pushes it off to the side so it doesn't come near us. Sometimes He sets His angels around us to protect us. Well, He protects us right in place. He puts a hedge around us. But sometimes He gives us extraordinary power to overcome the evil that's around us. See, God can protect us in lots of ways. We just have to be keeping close to God so we see the protection when it comes. It benefits us to stop as God's people, as God's people have always done, just to stop and reflect on the ways where God could have been, or things could have been much worse for us had God not intervened. And I can tell you, I see those things when I look back at my own life. Man, some of the stupid stuff I've gotten into. And yet God was there watching over. And I think that all of us, if we sit down and we think back about our lives, we'll think, oh man, I did some stupid stuff. And God was still there watching over me. He kept me safe from it. I could have been killed, but I wasn't. Things could have been much worse than they were for me. And I'm sure all of us can say the same thing. That same unseen hand, though, that's been guiding us our whole life and guided all the people of God throughout history, is still there. The unseen hand is still there, guiding and protecting and watching out for us. So let's give praise and honor to God who protects us. Our loving daddy. That's what He is. He's our daddy. He says that not only will He protect us, but He has the power to do so. And let's continue walking on that road, secure in the knowledge that He is there and He is promised to protect us. And He will not let the evil come near us. And instead, He will provide for us in every way. All we have to do